I've been using AI since ChatGPT 3 came out. In my work as a marketing data analyst, I've been experimenting with different techniques, working with clients, streamlining how we do things in my agency. So I'm going to walk through some of the things that I've learned along the way. The first thing I want to do is start with some level setting, some groundwork. There's really a couple of principles that I'm going to address throughout. One is when you're working with data, the solutions you use to analyze the data and specifically speed up analysis with AI depend a lot on the cost of getting answers wrong or getting insights wrong. So low cost, you have more options. When you're in a circumstance where the costs are high, I would recommend more guardrails and more process around how are you using AI. And we'll go into specific recommendations. And then the other thing is how complex, how messy is the data underneath? So a single data source, a few columns, well understood, pretty simple. Most of the time, we want to start bringing in multiple data sources. Maybe we want to tie them together. That gets complicated. A lot of times we have gaps in our data and whatnot. So a little level setting to start. Then another really key point is context. And it's an oversimplification to say that an LLM is just a probability engine that predicts the next word, but it's not that much of an oversimplification. And when we think about words, what they mean in different contexts is really important. So as a demonstration, I've got this example. What is the significance of an apple? I gave this prompt to Claude and I said, give me all of your answers with associated probabilities. Because what an LLM is doing is it's really predicting the answer that it thinks you're going to want based on what it's been trained about with language. So in the case of an apple, it's received a lot of different training data. We'll look at the answers we got. So number one is religious, the forbidden fruit. I said, what is the significance of an apple? And the way that I phrase that does matter. I actually think the first answer is not bad. Like when you put it that way, that is a pretty good answer. Not probably what I'd mean as a data analyst. I'm not sure what I mean as a data analyst. But the point here is really just that the way that we use words, context provides a lot of help. This is pretty familiar probably if you've been working with ChatGPT or Claude on anything really. The more context you give it, the better. But when we're working with data, that can mean a lot of effort going into putting context on what metrics mean, where there may be issues with the data, what a client's goals are. So we'll use some examples of that as well. Another really important aspect that relates to context is data is not truth. So we use a lot of terms when we're talking about marketing data. We have engagement, for example. We've got users. Conversions is another one. Here I'm using the example of leads. And I break it down. This is sort of an imaginary example drawn from a lot of real world experience where I reported 850 leads. The salesperson or the sales team's like, we didn't get 850 leads. And what do my 850 leads represent? Well, to me, they represent what I can measure, which is probably a form fill on a website, or often would be that. And they may be real, like actual people that might be potentially interested in my product or service. But when people fill out forms, they're not necessarily qualified. Maybe it's not my target audience. Maybe they can't afford what I'm selling, whatever. They're not qualified leads at all, which is usually what the sales team thinks of as a lead. But there are also a lot of spam. We have duplicates. We're tracking a form. Somebody accidentally refreshes, sends the form twice. We track it twice. People fill out the lead form on a website because they're looking for a job or they're trying to sell you something. And then, of course, there's the problem of consent and privacy, and it's a lot of people we can't track potentially. So we say 850 leads. All of this is context that matters if I'm going to interpret that data. So like if the CEO says our goal is 100,000 leads a month and I say, great, we hit our goal, but I need something totally different. Well, that's context. The LLM is going to come back and say you hit your goal unless I give it the context that when I say a lead, it means something very different. So I described how the cost of getting it wrong matters. I'm going to present some approaches to analyzing data on this grid. The x-axis being cost of getting it wrong, cost is low on the left, high on the right, complexity of the data. And use this as a framework to think about the problems that we're solving and the tools that we can use them to solve them. Doing some brainstorming, single source. I'm thinking about spending more in meta, pulling a bunch of metadata, do some back and forth with the LLM. Stakes are low. If the conclusions I come to are not entirely right, maybe I cost a little bit of budget, but it's not like I'm reporting out to stakeholders. In the upper right, we've got monthly report across 5 sources, and let's say this is going out to the C-suite. Stakes are high. I better be able to back up those numbers. And the last thing I want is somebody saying, wait a second, I went and checked and this number is wrong. So I want to make sure I get it right. I want to make sure I'm combining data in the right ways. I'm giving it the context that it needs when I'm doing analysis, or I have the context I need when I'm doing analysis. So further up and to the right, more context and guardrails, and we'll talk about what those look like. So these are the solutions that I'm going to talk through, from simplest to most complex, pasting data into chat on the lower left, all the way up to deterministic data collection and modeling, layering AI insights on top of that. And I'm going to give you an example of a solution I built that way, which has been really effective for dealing with those circumstances when you want to make sure you're getting things right. So, simplest example, we don't need to spend time on this. This is probably one of the first things we did. We're like, what happens if I take this spreadsheet and I paste it into AI? I will maybe pause for a second and just say, I'm not talking about data security here. We use an organizational Claude account, and it's locked down. Data is not used to train the model. Data is not shared externally. You want to make sure whatever you do is within your organization's policies, permissions from the sources, whoever you're getting the data from, that it's okay to use it the way that you're going to use it with AI. The next one, and this one is really powerful, means analyzing data with MCPs. So in case you don't know, an MCP is a standard way to connect to Claude or ChatGPT to external systems. So like there's an MCP for Gmail, there's an MCP for like Asana for project management, those sorts of things. So a lot of external systems have MCPs. It's like a plug and play protocol where we can plug internal systems in. And at this point, there are a variety of solutions for getting data into an LLM, and that's what I'm going to talk about. You can also look at, like, Facebook recently released an MCP where you can actually do all of your Facebook campaign management via MCP, which means you could do it in Claude or ChatGPT or another LLM system. So what does this look like? I'll show an example on the next slide, but we're going into settings or ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, connecting to an external source. You'll find a list of MCPs that you can connect to. Some of the ones that I like to use aren't on that list. So the one that we actually use for marketing data is Jepto. And I like that for a couple of reasons. One is one MCP and I can connect to multiple data sources versus like individually connecting to there's Google Analytics has an MCP. Meta, really most major platforms have MCP servers that you can connect to. Jepto, we can connect to a bunch of them, but I can also govern access from within Jepto, so I can set up the connections. I can organize them by client, which is nice for an agency. Nice if you're not an agency. There's sometimes that organization is really helpful. So I like that. Also, Jepto spent some time building a layer to give a leg up on how to look at the data from the different sources and what the different metrics mean from different platforms. And that's kind of that context that I was talking about, like starting to provide explanations of, in this platform, this is what a conversion looks like, this is what it means versus this other platform. Starting to add some of that context to make the likelihood that you're going to get accurate analysis out of it higher. So this approach, great for doing things quickly from an LLM, pulling in data from different sources, combining them, exploring. Combining data across these different sources is a notoriously complicated process in data analysis. Like, it's honestly, like I've been working with SQL, the language of databases, for like 20 years. And one of the more complicated things you do is figure out the right way to join different data sets and make sure that you're combining the data accurately. Just to give you a microcosm of why that's complicated, something that we like to do with marketing data a lot of times is combine landing page information from an ad platform or, for example, Google Search Console with what we get in Google Analytics. Google Search Console represents landing pages in a slightly different way from Google Analytics. So you have to know how it's different and account for that when you combine the two. Otherwise, you're going to get incorrect numbers. You're going to end up with a mismatch between those landing pages. I include in my watch that with great power comes great responsibility. You're going to, when you try this out, if you haven't already, you're going to be like, holy crap, this is amazing. I can connect to so many different things. I can pull data in. I can ask all kinds of questions. Yes, super powerful. And you really need to know what you're doing. You need to understand the data. Like the context that I'm talking about, take it seriously because, like I say, these metrics mean different things. And then most importantly, LLMs get things wrong. They hallucinate, or you give them flawed data, they're going to give you back flawed answers. So take that very seriously. So I will give you an example. Here I've got a Claude window, and all I did is I've got this prompt. I would like to use the Jepto MCP and connect it to October's Google Analytics and Google Search Console and create a dashboard showing organic search performance for last month. Gave it a couple minutes, bam, I've got this dashboard. And I can scroll down, there's actually charts and stuff. You see in the upper right, it says open in Google Chrome. So this is web ready. I can take this and I can host it somewhere and publish it so other people can access it. And literally that was my whole prompt. No context, few minutes, I've got a dashboard. So kind of mind blowing, right? Remember, great power, great responsibility. It is super cool. I would just ask that you think about a few things before you go hog wild with dashboards. One is, my experience, most dashboards don't get used. So yeah, you can create 100 dashboards a day if you want, but think seriously about what your audience is interested. Spend some time planning. Do more with your prompt. I wanted to show you a simple example, but you really want to start to provide, like, here are insights I care about, and here's things to think about. You can start to build in some of the guardrails that I talked about. So in Claude, you can create a project. In ChatGPT, you can create a custom GPT and build in, like, you can add a document that explains what different metrics mean, explains what a client's goals are, explains like a history of, like, we added these conversions on this date, so they won't exist before that sort of thing. I love this approach. Use it a lot. Limited guardrails produces a lot of flawed results. So you want to double check those results, and I do not recommend this approach when the stakes are high. The next one is conversational analytics, connecting directly to a data warehouse. So if you're in a situation where you have data in BigQuery, Snowflake, another data warehouse, those two for sure have built-in mechanisms for creating, like in BigQuery, it's called a data agent that you can create. And you can, the guardrails I talked about, you can add context. You can define specifically queries that you want to do to pull data. So we can call that, in programming, we would call that deterministic. You can say rules-based, like we're setting rules for how we're going to get this data out of this table and how we're going to combine it with these other things. It requires a little bit more expertise, but in BigQuery, you've got Gemini to help you, and Snowflake as another example, you have AI will help you model that data. And then you can create an interface where anybody can come and do natural language queries and say, I want to compare how mobile traffic changed on this site versus that site last month or something like that, whatever somebody can think of. So a lot more governance possible. You're still counting on an LLM to do interpretation. I think this is a pretty strong approach, and this is kind of in between the category of giving an LLM free rein to interpret data, which is where you run into problems. Again, this is under the hood in some ways a probability engine for trying to figure out what word comes after what other word, not focused on getting data right. You've probably seen somebody share, like, doing simple math games and seeing how an LLM gets basic math problems wrong. Well, obviously that's kind of important for data analysis. So the next category I want to talk about is where, instead of thinking of the LLM as where you're going to get all your answers from. Think of it as an incredibly powerful tool for helping you build solutions that you can use to analyze data with AI. In any LLM, we use Claude. You can just switch over to Claude Code. Claude Code is built for this. It's built for creating solutions in programming languages with strict rules for how to combine data. In this case, we're talking about combining data, representing data. So we can have much more of a rules-based approach, but you don't need to be a programmer. So wherever you're at right now, like this may sound intimidating, and maybe your goal for the next year is just to create fancy Google Sheets or Excel solutions. I've spent a lot of my career doing that. You can do a ton with data in just regular old spreadsheets. The formulas can get pretty complicated, and Claude Code or Codex, other solutions can help you do that. The other thing that I love is along the way, you can learn what you're doing. Like that's part of the joy of it, is that the LLM is a conversational tool. And so you can say, explain to me what you did. Why did this work this way? Or you try it yourself and it doesn't work. Throw the code in there and say, what did I do wrong? Are there better ways to do this? What's the next step on my learning journey? I really can't urge you strongly enough. Play around with it wherever you are right now. You'll see developers that are using coding agents in their development environments and it looks complicated and hard, and it probably is kind of complicated and hard, but we're not building super complex software necessarily. You might get there, but for now, what you're trying to do is do analysis faster and better. In this example, it's good if you know the questions that you're trying to ask and the stakes are getting higher, and it's great for learning. Again, you still have the problem of the input. So you're putting flawed data in. You still want to think about, and this is part of what I would put in my conversation. Like when you're working with AI, explain the warts. Like think of AI as brilliant, but kind of naive, right? Like doesn't know what you know about ad platforms, organic search, Google Analytics. So explain some of the nuances, explain what matters to you, what matters to your organization. This is an example. I've got a screenshot of Claude Desktop open, switch over to code. My prompt is, can you suggest several ways I can analyze my Google Analytics website data using the Google Analytics API? Please ask clarifying questions. So API being an interface for connecting to Google Analytics. You can authenticate using the account that you use to log into Google Analytics. You don't need to do anything complicated there. The please ask clarifying questions, big tip for when you're building anything or asking them to build something for you. Have it ask you questions along the way constantly. I'm going to always use some version of that in my prompts. Part of it is because I might have left something out in instructions I give. I'm using examples of really simple instructions, but I'll tend to spend a few hours actually writing out detailed instructions. I actually use voice transcription, but I will spend a bit of time creating kind of detailed, like this is what I want to build, and giving context of why and what it's for and who it's for, etc. So you can see here, it just quickly comes back and it's like, what's the main thing you want to understand from your GA data? And it starts listing things out and it's starting to try to get a sense, and it's going to ask me some more questions before it starts coming up with a solution. Something really cool about these coding tools within LLMs is the main ones now have like sort of plan mode and execute mode, some version of that, where the plan mode is sort of built for helping you come up with a plan, and then the execute mode goes off and sends different coding agents off to do all the different parts to build you what you asked for. Love this approach. So let me share a little bit of what I built. I've done a lot of work with data, pretty comfortable with JavaScript. I've sort of klutzed around with Python a bit, but I'm not a strong Python programmer. And I want to build a tool and learn how to build a tool with a UI that connects to data. The first thing I did was actually, I had a specific thing in mind, but I really wanted it to teach me. So that's the road that I went down. I said, teach me how to do this. And along the way, I started building a plan, building a tool. It's led to this tool called Treeline Intelligence that we use in our agency. Spent about 6 months. Did spend a fair amount of time doing it, I will say, because honestly, it's a freaking blast. It's fun to do. Treeline Intelligence, we use it for monitoring analytics, making sure everything's working, discovering insights, sharing insights with our clients. I'll talk about some principles and guardrails we have around that side of things. I definitely approach this from the philosophy of my team has a ton of knowledge about SEO and paid media and analytics, digital marketing in general. What I want to do is give them superpowers. I don't want to replace them. Like, they have a ton of knowledge. How can I help them apply that knowledge more quickly, gather the information they need more quickly, sort of give them a leg up? Not like we're going to build a tool that does all this work for us. Philosophically, I think that's the way everybody should be thinking about it, because AI does make a lot of mistakes. And that idea of expert humans amplifying the work that humans do rather than replacing it, for a lot of reasons, I think is the right way to go. But importantly, one of them is the results are way better. Like, I've tried a lot of different tools, a lot of different, like, we've got this new AI agent built in that can do all this stuff for you. And if you've worked with any of those things in the ad platforms, sometimes it's all right. Most of the time you want to make changes if you know what you're doing in those platforms. I want to describe the building blocks to help you think about this. Certainly, if you'd like to know more about the tool, visit our website, contact us. Happy to talk to you about it. But my point here is the things that I learned building it, not just to show off the tool. There's really two layers to it. But the foundation layer is all rules-based, deterministic, written in code. It is a Node application, if you care. But it gets data via APIs, built-in rules for combining data. And then it's got layers of context and guardrails that it inserts before it contacts AI. So the way of thinking about it is essentially it's dynamically amassing lots of complex data, sort of like if you were going and you're getting ready to do a big report for like performance last year, and you might go into different platforms, download data from here, collect it all in one place, and then start crunching through it, creating charts, doing that sort of thing. Well, this is a similar philosophy where the tool is gathering everything, pulling it all together, and then it's going to hand it off to an LLM based on a set of templates and rules, and say, here, I'd like for you to look at this and look for insights, build out a narrative around this data. We'll talk about that a little bit. So it's inserting context, setting guardrails. Like, as an example, like, we have a template for analyzing, doing a competitive analysis of a page on a website. And you can pull it, like, define, like, here's competitors' pages that are sort of equivalent. I want you to look at those, and it's going to gather data on search volume, search visibility for the page, the competitors, analyze the HTML elements on the page. So there's a rigorous template that says, here's the structure of the deliverable, here's the data I need for the deliverable, and then handoffs of, like, send this off to AI, like, give me some insights about this set of data. And then actually when the insights come back, there's another rules-based layer that makes sure nothing got messed with, and things like tables and charts actually don't get touched by the LLM, because that's one of the big places where you'd have problems. So hopefully this helps you think about it again. Strongly encourage you to, if you haven't been doing it, to pop into a coding agent. A couple takeaways, things that I've learned. Ask dumb questions. The great thing about an LLM is it doesn't give you attitude, you know? Like, if you work in an organization with software developers, probably they don't want to spend a lot of time helping you learn how to code. You'll get a little attitude if you ask dumb questions. Maybe I'm being harsh. But in any case, I find it sort of freeing to just be like, I don't know what this means. Tell me what this means. Ask the LLM to teach you as you go. Have the LLM review its own work as you're building. Keep letting it look at the outputs. You could, in some cases, download them, load them back in as you get more comfortable. There are ways to have it, like if you're posting it to a web page, you can actually crawl the page and look at the report itself and evaluate it that way. It's not going to do it inherently under most circumstances. You actually have to tell it, like, okay, now review your own work. Include that prompt language of ask me clarifying questions. And then the other thing that I think is key is LLMs have a propensity to say, here's truth, when it is just a probabilistic answer. And a lot of times it's wrong when we're talking about interpreting data. So when you're giving instructions, say, don't present things as truth, provide the data, posit things as hypotheses. And what I do actually is I have it insert little highlighted yellow boxes that say analyst review, analyst review, analyst review, like checkpoints where a person's going to go through and look at the output and make sure that it's correct. And we do have a propensity to accept what's given to us and say, looks good, sending it on. People can get lazy, but there's also just an aspect of, I don't think it's a laziness so much as human nature. When something looks convincing, we don't tend to approach it as critically. The multi-source MCP solution I described, we use Jepto. If you use Supermetrics, they have one. If you use Funnel, they have one. Windsor AI has one. There's various out there. Like, these are all tools that you can use to gather different data from different sources. That's a great part of your toolkit, and then start building. I'll close with a quote that I love, which is Picasso, computers are useless. They can only give you answers. And I think that's super relevant when we're thinking about how we use AI, that as analysts or people that work with data, the report, the dashboard, if I'm just to go back on the work that I do, whether it's the last week or last year, last 10 years, most of the value that I created was not in the report that I sent to a client. It was not in the dashboard. It was in the learning along the way and exploring the data and discovering, like, I have to create this report. Am I tracking the right things? Do I understand what the client cares about? And are we optimizing to it? So really, I think sometimes we think that the sort of meaningful outcome of our work is the PDF report or the dashboard, when in fact I think sometimes those don't get looked at all, but we are creating value by digging in there, getting insights, using those insights to improve the marketing that we're doing, understand the metrics that matter. So enough of that. Thanks a ton for watching. Hope you liked it. Click the like button if you did.